All right, thank you very much for staying with TV3. This is New Day and we are airborne. We have in studio the Minister in charge of Trade and Industry, Dr. Eko Spiel-Gabra, and we're going to be talking some of the key issues that have happened in the last few weeks with regard to some decisions that the ministry took, and then also would throw more light on the ministry's agenda to promote made in Ghana goods. Latter part of the interview will be picking his thoughts on some other issues that are making rounds in the news. Dr. Eko Spiel-Gabra, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Let me start with the recent discussion that has come up as a result of a directive that the Ministry of Trade and Industry gave bordering on cashew. So the directive was that there was a ban on the exportation of raw cashew from Ghana. For 2 months. For 2 months. So there was even a timeline. What went into the consideration of this directive in the first place?
Thank you for that question. Sometime last year, and of course, all ministers periodically go around the country, so I do the same myself. And in August last year, I was in the Brong-Ahafo region just to see about the state of business development and industrial development in Ghana. And it came to pass there that the cashew industry at the time, which has 12 processing plants with an annual processing capacity of about 70,000 tons, that's about what Ghana can process in cashews, 11 of those 12 were out of business. They were there, but they were idle. They had no raw cashew nuts. When I investigated, that was the reason that they can't get raw cashew nuts. Because most of the raw cashews in Ghana are exported. 85 to 90% of our cashews were being exported last year. So upon consultation with the industry, the view was that some countries have tried to solve that problem by at least closing a certain period in the year to allow the local cashew processors to have some cashew nuts to process. And then in the other parts of the year, potentially the exports could take place. Following that, there was then a Cashew Industry Association conference at the International Conference Center late last year, which I attended and spoke at, and where all the interest groups are also represented. And this matter also came up again as one of several possible solutions. So upon reflection within the industry, the view was that we could come out with such an administrative directive in order to restrict cashew exports for a short period and let these processors have some cashew nuts, and to create jobs in the country, to generate additional foreign exchange, and also to even put some money in the government's chest through tax revenues. In fact, according to one of the cashew processors, if we process about 5,000 metric tons of cashews, we probably get about $5 million. So the 60,000 or so metric tons of cashew that we produce in Ghana every year will fetch only about $60 million. However, if we processed it, we would get about 100 million. Okay. So it's about a $40 million revenue to the economy, which we are losing by simply allowing others to take it mostly to India and for them to create jobs in their country at the expense of the brothers and sisters and mothers and uncles of the very cashew growers who think they must export it. So it's really up to them. I mean, they want to export the cashew and deprive their own families in the same Brong-Ahafo region, which is where most of the cashews are produced and where many of the factories also are. But of course, cashews grow in many other regions in the country, at least 5 regions all grow cashew. Then, well, that's fine. But as an officer of the Republic of Ghana, my responsibility is to look out for what is in Ghana's interest, not what is in the interest of some particular parochial group of people, whether they are traders of cashew, importers of cashew, even processors of cashew. And so the national interest was to have this export window. Then you have 10 whole months when the cashews could be exported. So it's not as if you're denying them of exports altogether. But at least you're allowing some period for the local processing plants also to process. You cannot be attracting foreign investment and even local investment, go into industry. The guy establishes a factory, $2, $5, $10 million, brings equipment in, and then he can't get the raw material. Then what's the point of promoting industries in Ghana?
It sounds like a very good idea, and which needed the backing of all and sundry. But was it that due consultation was not done? For which reason there was a backlash? Again,
everybody can be interested. You can be an auto mechanic and be interested in the cashew industry. You can be a banker and be interested in the cashew industry. So quite clearly, you cannot limit the range of possible interested parties or stakeholders. But in this case, when the ban took place, we admit that if the ban had taken place, or the announcement of it had taken place towards the end of last year, when actually we wanted to do this, the traders and the buyers would have had enough time to adjust themselves. But we're waiting for certain documents from the industry that was very delayed, and indeed it didn't even come until after the ban had taken place. A report from that very conference that we attended, and we couldn't just wait until the whole cashew season is over, because the cashew season is mostly end of January to about May, June. And so the decision, when it was taken, it was in the middle of the buying and selling period. That is what caused most of the trauma, because then the traders began to, influence the growers to agitate, call their MPs and, make some noise.
Is it possible that at least now that this good idea is still on the table, you would consult those that need to speak, who have an interest in this, so the decision can be implemented?
Absolutely. Both as a former teacher and also as a communications person. Anytime you try to persuade somebody about something and they don't agree or they don't accept it, your general view is that they haven't understood the problem very well. So if you're teaching a classroom and there are 50 students and only 10 pass your exams, you find that, well, maybe there's something you can do to bring the other 30 or 40 students up to understand the questions and understand how to pass. So no problem with going back to the drawing board and consulting more widely, which is what we've said in the statement that we issued, and getting cabinet involved if cabinet officers want to be part of this, getting parliament involved if parliamentarians want to be part of this, because there are different levels of decision making. Right. The view that this was not a government decision, of course, is false, because ministers don't have to take everything to cabinet or everything to parliament. But where there's legislation involved, then of course, cabinet and parliament get involved. This was not a legislative process, it was an administrative process. But to the extent that the interest groups are very widely dispersed, and we may have underestimated the degree to which traders could influence growers because of the money that was on the table, and the fact that some people had made some prior arrangements with these buyers from India to sell their cashew to them. So there was this feeling of, hey,
you're going to be destroying business. And in the same vein, we also heard that quite a number of industry companies within the cashew industry have closed down because of lack of raw material.
Well, since last year, as I'm saying.
And
it's not peculiar to the cashew industry, even the cocoa processing industry. There were many factories last year which also lacked over 100,000 metric tons of cocoa to process. So one of the major challenges facing the industrial sector as a whole is the challenge of getting enough raw material to process. Whether it's the sugar plant that will be coming up in Commander next month, which needs sugarcane to feed it, but the sugarcane growers would like to sell it to Akpeteshi distillers instead of selling it to a sugarcane plantation. Or people would like to sell their raw pineapples and mangoes overseas rather than feed mango.
Does that mean there's a lack of understanding or education in the regard of we knowing what raw materials we have and the companies that need these raw materials as against the interest of just exporting them?
Well, there's a value chain issue. There's a private interest versus a public interest issue. There's a public education dimension that I'm sure can always be intensified. There's a pricing and also a timeliness of payment issue, because as a cashew grower myself over the past 17 years, one of the challenges I face, even as a minister, is if I'm trying to sell my cashews, I may not get immediate payment from a processor. I may get payment a month later, whereas the trader who may come with cash from another country can put money on the table. Payment. So if you are not patient, then that's where you want to send your money. This is also happening even in the oil palm industry and in the rubber industry. When I was in Brong Ahafo last year, I heard of chiefs telling me that they have 10, 20,000 hectares and a cocoa plantation, but they are willing to come down to oil palm processing plants in the western region and potentially convert their cocoa trees into oil palm or rubber, if the rubber will grow there, because they've heard they can get faster cash payment when they supply their products to the factories. So all these differentials in how much you pay, the price, how quickly you pay, can affect a person's desire to either export or to process.
A bane, on the neck of quite a number of governments. The payment, prompt payment after products are given out. Is there a plan?
But this is a private sector exercise.
Industry.
It's a private sector issue, but of course there's credit enhancement that could potentially be put into the industries, and that requires capital. And Ghana, for all kinds of reasons, is currently a capital short country, and that's why, partly why we are in an IMF program, and we have budget deficits and constraints even on our budget. All ministries, departments, and agencies are enduring a 50% across the board cut in their goods and services budget for 2016 against 2015, etc. But we have to engage more directly with the private financial institutions and even the public-private financial institutions. And one of the recommendations that the Cost of Credit Committee that we set up last year is putting forward for cabinet consideration is to review the decisions that made such institutions as the National Investment Bank, which was established in 1960, to help industrial development with various kinds of credit. So if the National Investment Bank had its previous mandate, it could make credit available to the processing industries to enable them to buy the raw materials faster from the growers in order for industry to move.
Okay.
But they've been converted into a universal bank. The Agricultural Development Bank, also, which was established with a specific mandate for medium to longer term lending. If you, the cashew trees, the cocoa trees, the rubber trees, oil palm trees, all take between 3 to 7 years to grow and to give you the fruits. So if you don't have a banker that will give you 3 to 5 year money, and most of our banks are giving 90-day to 6-month money for mostly imports and exports, then you have a banking system that is distorted, because 30 universal banks, hardly any development bank left in Ghana, a couple of mortgage banks, then 400 microfinance institutions, which can lend between 30 and 100% a year. I mean, that's a very difficult financial environment for the business sector to prosper.
Is there light at the end of the tunnel with regard to financing and funding agriculture in general?
Well, there has to be light at the end of the tunnel. We cannot give up, but I'm saying it involves government policies to some extent, government intervention and modification of some regulations. It involves collaboration from the banks and financial institutions with regards to the interest rate spread, which is one of the issues that the expert group is looking at. The difference between your savings rate, if you go and put money in the bank, how much they give you for saving, 6%. If you go back the next day and say, well, I gave you 50 million, or let's say 50,000 cedis yesterday in savings. Can I borrow 10,000 out of that 50,000 I just give to you? Then that becomes 28 or 30%. Most countries do not tolerate a lending spread of more than 10% between your savings and your lending rate. But this is an area where the Bank of Ghana, which is the regulator, needs to look very closely and try and bridge the difference between the lending and the savings rate. You see that in the foreign exchange market, where if you have a cedi and you want dollars, you may have to take 4 cedis to get a dollar. If you have a dollar and you want cedis, they may give you 3.8. That's a very small spread, and they make enough money from that spread. When it comes to banking, then the spread becomes excessive in the minds of most people.
Let's stay on trade and then see how best we can, put the issue of helping export our raw materials in general. I mean, the ban in itself raised its own set of questions, but how well have we done as a country, I mean, since you took over, in terms of our materials and products that we export abroad?
Well, we are doing reasonably well. We could do much better. I mean, we have a non-traditional export system and a national export strategy, a national export development program, where we are hoping to grow our non-traditional exports from about 2 to 2.5 billion a year to something in the region of 5 billion. But to do that, you have to add value. If you continue to sell the raw material in the raw state, whether it is raw fish rather than smoked fish, or canned fish, or raw cashew rather than processed cashew, or raw cocoa rather than processed cocoa, you will not get the value that you need in the international markets. For example, it has been estimated that the price that a farmer gets for, say, coffee versus what the finished value of a bottle of coffee is, the finished product coffee that we drink, the farmer gets only about 6% of the finished coffee price in terms of a ton. So 1 ton of coffee raw and 1 ton of coffee processed, there's a ratio of between 6 to 100% in that differential. So we are losing that 90% if you keep selling the thing in raw coffee form. And cocoa is probably very similar.
And clearly you should have a strategy in place.
Gold is similar. If you export raw gold, rather than converting most of your gold into jewelry, then you are losing money, because the raw gold, you can only sell it max at the world market price of 1,200 or 1,100 or whatever the price is. But if you convert that jewelry into something that, you know, my good friends in the acting world and in the entertainment world will wear, a Beyonce and you know, all the other rappers in Ghana, then immediately it's 20,000, 50,000, 30,000, because it has a certain design and packaging value.
But it's in that same line, at least for like gold you mentioned, we have 2 gold refineries in the country which at least are on the verge of processing, starting
but
to
if you
process
do not stop some of the gold that is going out in raw form, then those refineries will face the same problem as the cashew factories. No, but, they'll be lying there and the raw gold is going out.
Clearly, this falls on your lap, not yours alone, but the government in power and the key stakeholders.
But it's been going on for 50 years, so it's not just this government. It's every government that we've had.
So what is going to be done, or what are the plans in place? Because, you know, there are those who are watching would be interested in the fact that we need to start.
But we need collaboration from the industry players. Parliament may have had this view, but it was a view generated from the ground, from the traders and the farmers who need
for that of the cashew,
public education,
because like you mentioned, it was the middle part of the business.
Who's fighting Galamsey in Ghana right now? There are Chinese companies that come in, use Ghanaians, maybe public servants and chiefs and some maybe political operatives at the local level to have access to, you know, mineral resources. They invariably sell mostly through Indians, and Indians send it to India to process. So if you look at the trade statistics in Ghana today, you find that Ghana believes that its trade with India is about 1.1 billion, both import and exports, where India last week, and it came out in a very interesting way. But the Indians say that the trade with Ghana, 80% of it, of their imports from Ghana is gold. And it's not recorded in Ghana's trade statistics because the exit of the gold is obviously through mostly illegal means. So that is law enforcement. It is customs. It is police.
So it goes beyond just administrative decisions.
Of course. And it goes beyond the ministry because gold is actually in the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. Good. But we are interested in it because there's a trade dimension to it.
Absolutely.
So it requires a lot of collaboration of people to make it happen. But so in almost all places,
what,
you know,
what
the
I'm
good people
getting
are
from
not
you,
often as many as the bad people, unfortunately.
Good. Doc, what I'm getting from you is that we know what the solutions to the problems are, but the will to execute these solutions.
You know the solution to Galamsey?
Not only Galamsey, but...
No, let's start with Galamsey, because that's not in my sector directly, so that it doesn't look as if I have a particular beef. We are all here, and foreigners go to mine openly in our various communities. The chiefs are there, they see it. This chief executives may be there, MPs may be there, community leaders may be there. But why are they tolerating it? And they are, you know, spoiling the environment, putting cyanide and mercury and things in their water that they drink themselves in that very community, potentially killing them over time. So you can blame government in Accra or blame some political leaders, but at the very community level, we must also be willing to stand up for what is good for ourselves. So yes, government has a role, but all of us as citizens have different roles. So you can put in all the laws you want, but if a law enforcement agent wants to collaborate with the exporter to let them take it out, recently several kilos of gold were found at the Kotoka airport. So that was a very good achievement by the law enforcement agencies. But quite clearly, they can't potentially see everything
all
and
that
seize
goes
all at all times.
But you see, my question now is, if you can help us understand, at least in the next year or two, what are the few steps we can take to ensure that we add value to our exports? The
few steps we can take is just as we are trying to take it. Let those who are processing be given raw materials to process in the cashew industry, in the cocoa industry, in the fruit industry, so that we don't send only raw materials outside. I hope this is not too difficult for most people to understand. But I agree that once you get on the floor, on the transaction level, then people have their own personal transactional interest. Somebody has grown his mango. He would like to sell it to Mr. A. You are government. You want to interfere and say, no, sell it to Madam B because he's processing. He feels like, hey, my friend, this mangoes belong to me. Why are you trying to interfere with who I sell it to? So if I sell it to Mr. A, I may get paid only. I sold mangoes last year. I got paid after 5 weeks. But I was patient. Somebody wants his payment today. So if you're not going to give his payment today, then he wants to do something else.
Since you took over, and probably before then, you have been spotted at various places in locally sewn or designed fabrics. Is it a deliberate decision to, as part of your campaign to promote Made in Ghana?
Well, I thought people must set an example. So it's one thing to be saying Made in Ghana is a good thing. Let us, promote Made in Ghana. Then we ourselves are not patronizing it, because the Made in Ghana is not really only about the government procuring goods when it needs furniture for parliament or it needs, other food items for state events, but it's about each of us in our individual, private, daily shopping practices. When we go to a shop, we take the product and we look at the back of the product to see where it is made. We see another product in the same shop that is made in Ghana, and we consciously say, I want to create a job for my nephew or my niece or my uncle somewhere. Let me buy this product because that is what will strengthen this economy. This is what will create a job for my nephew or my niece. And so I'm going to buy that, even if it is 5 pesos or 10 pesos more.
Extra.
I'll do that, because that's how other countries did it. When their goods were not the best, the Koreans didn't always have the best cars in the world. The Japanese didn't always have the best cars in the world. But they stuck with whatever cars they had in the 1960s and 70s and gave those industries an opportunity to breathe, an opportunity to invest more in research and development, in technological innovation, better management practices, more capital investment. And then after 20 years, here we are on the world stage. We are all buying Kia, Hyundai cars, or
because they stuck to their own.
They stuck to their own.
And in that regard, we have heard that clearly there are plans by the ministry to push Made in Ghana items. There was a logo design which now is supposed to be on almost every product that we export. How far have we gone with that? And is it yielding the results we intended?
Well, we are making some progress. It requires really company by company negotiations, because the logo is available, but it's not available for free. We want the companies to make some contribution to the work of promoting Made in Ghana. We have to buy airtime, put out billboards, put out messages in newspapers and radio and TV. And that costs money, and the government budget is limited for reasons that we've already discussed. So we are hoping that the private sector manufacturers themselves, who will be the beneficiaries of the very program, because the Made in Ghana program works. It works for the local industry. So if we are helping you to get more customers, to increase your market share, to increase your revenues, to increase your profitability, and we are saying simply give us 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 for us to campaign for you, and you don't understand that also, then again, how much more understanding can you get? So the logo is available. Some companies have already signed up to use it. I think you have about 10 companies that have already indicated their willingness to use it and are different levels of negotiation. But the Association of Ghana Industries has 1,200 members. The Ghana Chamber of Commerce and Industry has also about over 1,000 members. And we are hopeful that at least half of these agencies will all eventually apply for and use the logo. But the logo itself, to use it, because it talks about premium quality, you must go through a Ghana Standards Authority process to certify that it's not just water. There are about 50 different water brands in the country. Not all will qualify to have the Made in Ghana logo. So having it actually is a sign of extra quality. And we hope that as many Ghanaian companies will therefore improve their quality standards over the years as much as possible, both to meet the logo and use it, and also to get the customer recognition and appreciation for additional sales.
You mentioned the Association of Ghana Industries and many other such companies or institutions that are established in the country. How has the working relationship been like with them? Like
I would say it's excellent. I would say it's excellent, and I hope they can speak for themselves. Our doors are very wide open. I mean, they can come to our offices at any time with no appointment if they want. They can make an appointment. We meet them in numerous fora. I mean, there's no forum that involves trade, investment, industry that I am not present, or one of my deputies or a civil servant is not present, and they are also not present. So almost on a weekly basis, there are fora on the Made in Ghana, they are represented. Local content, they are represented. Cost of credit, they are represented. So all our working groups and task forces, they are always present, and we listen to them, we visit them, they invite us to their annual general meetings, we attend, we speak, we discuss, we go on international.
Have there been any decisions taken? Have there been any decisions taken lately by the ministry that has raised issues with regard to how your relationship has been with the like Association of Ghana Industries and GUTA and the other institutions?
Well, they can speak for themselves, but I don't think it's a relationship issue. There may be differences in opinion on policy. And in many cases, the policies that they are concerned with are not set by the Ministry of Trade and Industry. For example, tariffs, how much levy should be put on a particular commodity is decided by the Ministry of Finance.
Right.
Now, we in the Ministry of Trade believe that there should be greater collaboration even between some of the ministries on such matters, but this is how we came and found it, because they see it as a revenue matter at the Ministry of Trade, at the Ministry of Finance, whereas we see it as revenue, but also matters that affect the capacity of industry to produce goods or which affect their cost of production, etc. But the relationship, I don't think is the issue, but policy differences, yes. GUTA will occasionally have some challenges, and the latest, as far as I'm aware, is mostly the cost of doing business in general, which they consider to be high because interest rates are high. We just discussed that power and utilities have been high and have been increased from time to time. There are a number of levies as well.
Yes, in the last few months as well, you raised some issues with regard to our tariffs and the implementation process of the tariffs. And there was some backlash as a result of what you said. But can you clarify what you really wanted to put across?
No, the point was that the PURC, as far as I knew, had provided a tariff increase of about 57% on the average. I think it was eventually revised to something lower in the early 50s.
Just slightly.
But in the implementation of that 57% average tariff, businesses and consumers said they were receiving bills that were more like 150% or 200%. So it is those bills that they were receiving that I was saying that those would be excessive. And they should be reviewed to see whether in the implementation of the 57% tariff, something had gone wrong and people were actually getting the wrong bills. That, as simple as that.
They just couldn't understand the meaning of that, because it looked as if you were saying that the staggered installation of it, implementation of it, was not in the interest of the business.
No, staggered rather is in the interest of business. Business people prefer, if you have to increase anything, increase it slowly over time so that their businesses can adjust, rather than don't increase anything for 4 years and then increase it very significantly in the 4th year. Okay. I mean, businesses generally have a problem with that. Unless you advise them 1 whole year in advance that I'm going to increase this thing next January or next February by Y%, then they put in their business plans. Anybody running a business knows that you run business on business planning. And business planning, you do forecasting in terms of where you think interest rates will be, where you think cost of inputs will be, raw materials, utility, etc., insurance, legal services. So in your business plan, suddenly find something in the marketplace that distorts it in terms of an excessive increase of something, whatever those factors of production are, then you have a challenge as a manager to manage that situation. So it's a matter of predictability and sustainability of policies and of decisions that business people usually have a challenge with. Right.
In conclusion, we are told that there's in the next few days we are going to be launching the Ghana Trade Facilitation Awards. Can you help us understand the rationale behind why would we want to do that?
Well, there are 2 levels of it. There's a trade facilitation, agreement at the World Trade Organization level, which again is coming to cabinet in terms of Ghana, signing up to the trade facilitation agreement at the WTO. But within Ghana, at the practical level, there's a view that we as a government and as a stakeholder in the trade environment should recognize those companies that do their best to improve and promote trade facilitation. Now, under the previous regime of destination inspection companies, and even now that we are moving towards a national single window, we discovered that up to 65 to 67% of companies and individuals that were importing goods often falsely, I am restraining myself from saying fraudulently, falsely fill out their import declaration forms.
Okay.
So an import declaration form is one that simply asks for your name, your address, what kind of goods are you importing, from which country, what is the value of the goods. And it's a simple form that one shouldn't be, I feel like, lying about. But many companies choose not to give the right information about themselves as a company, about who they're importing the goods from, about what the volume of the goods are, what the value of the goods are.
The content as well.
And etc. And that then makes it difficult to process their documents and even for them to clear their goods promptly from the ports. And then they come and complain that, well, it takes a long time to clear my goods, etc., etc. But why are 60% of import declaration forms containing false information? Because most of the time they're looking to avoid or, in some cases, evade taxes or duties. So for all those reasons, and the fact that the Ghana Ports and Harbour Authority, freight forwarding agencies, financial institutions are all part of the ecosystem of trade facilitation, there's a view that if you can recognize those institutions that have made an effort to stand out in terms of doing the right thing and obeying the law, then that will be a way of incentivizing others to follow. So it's a carrot and stick thing. Sometimes you feel you must punish people for doing the wrong thing, but you must also recognize and reward those who are doing the right thing. And the awards really are geared towards that, the recognition aspect.
All right, I would want to say a big thank you to you, Dr. Ekos Spiel-Gabra, for your time and clarifying a number of the issues that was bugging the minds of many. It's a privilege to have you in studio. We hope to have you more often so we can throw more light on these issues. He's the Minister in charge of Trade and Industry. Dr. Ekos Spiel-Gabra was our guest this morning. Thank you very much, and we wish you well to have a good time. This is New Day.